The dare hung in the stale, beer-soaked air of the bar, a stupid, glittering bauble of drunken bravado. "Dater, we dare you!" My friend Mark jabbed a thumb toward the far end of the long mahogany bar. My eyes followed, landing on a woman who seemed to be carved from a different, more expensive material than the rest of us. She sat alone, a glass of what looked like white wine untouched before her posture a straight line of silent command. Her hair was a severe, elegant blonde bob, and her dress was a simple, dark sheath that probably cost more than my month's rent. She was an island of quiet authority in a sea of Friday night noise. Typical. It was my 30th birthday, and my friend's idea of a celebration was dragging me to the Gilded Glass, a place where the cocktails had names like Vesper's Reproach, and the bar nuts probably had a better credit score than I did. I felt like a stray dog in a show kennel, my worn flannel and work jeans a stark contrast to the tailored suits and designer labels. "Come on, Liam," Josh slurred, sloshing beer onto the table. "It's your birthday. Live a little. What's the worst that can happen?" She says no. The worst that could happen was far more elaborate than a simple no. It involved a cascade of public humiliation, a look of withering pity, and the kind of security guard who enjoys his job a little too much. I knew the type. I'd seen them on the construction sites of the high-rises I sometimes worked on, guarding the pristine lobbies from people who looked like me. I shook my head, taking a long pull from my own, much cheaper beer. "Leave it. I'm not your trained monkey." "Afraid?" Mark goaded, his eyes glinting with the mean-spirited fun that only 3 overpriced IPAs could induce. Was I afraid? Of course I was. That woman radiated a kind of self-possession that could curdle milk. She looked like she fired people for sport, like she ate men like me for a light appetizer. But it was more than that. The dare wasn't about her. It was about me. It was a commentary on my life, a prank aimed squarely at the chasm between my world and hers. Liam the carpenter, the guy with sawdust in his hair and calluses on his hands, trying to talk to a woman who probably summered in places I couldn't find on a map. The joke was hilarious. I just wasn't laughing. My life was a quiet, contained loop. I woke up in the small, Spartan apartment above my workshop. The smell of sawdust and wood glue was the first thing I registered every morning, a scent more familiar to me than any perfume. I'd make coffee, listen to the city stirring outside my window, and then descend the creaking wooden stairs into my sanctuary. The workshop was my whole world. It was filled with the ghosts of projects past and the promise of projects to come. The sweet, sharp scent of cedar, the heavy aroma of oak, the neat stacks of lumber waiting to be given form and purpose. My hands, stained and scarred, knew the language of wood better than they knew how to hold a conversation at a place like this. But that world was shrinking. A letter had arrived 2 weeks ago, crisp and impersonal. The old brick building that housed my shop and home had been sold to a development corporation. My rent was set to triple. It wasn't an eviction notice, not technically, but it was a death sentence. The number on that page was an impossible figure, a casual flick of a pen that threatened to erase my entire existence. The weight of it had settled deep in my chest, a cold, hard stone of anxiety that I carried with me everywhere. So when Mark said, "What have you got to lose?" the answer echoed silently in my head. Everything. But they kept pushing, their laughter grating on my already frayed nerves. It was the same old dynamic. I was the quiet one, the sensible one, the one they could always rely on to be the butt of the joke without putting up too much of a fight. And tonight, I was just tired. Tired of the worry, tired of the quiet desperation, and most of all, tired of feeling so damn small. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. A cheer went up from my so-called friends. I pushed my chair back, my heart starting a frantic, clumsy drum solo against my ribs. I smoothed down my flannel shirt, a completely useless gesture. It was still a flannel shirt. I was still me. Every step I took toward her felt like walking a plank. The bar chatter seems to fade into a dull roar, my focus narrowing to the straight, unyielding line of her back. She hadn't moved a muscle. She was probably staring into her wine, contemplating stock options or hostile takeovers. Closer. I could smell her perfume now, something clean and sharp and green, like snapped stems. Not floral or sweet. It was disciplined. That was the only word for it. I was 2 feet away when she finally turned her head, her gaze sweeping over me with a cool, dismissive assessment. Her eyes were a pale, startling blue. Ice. That was the first thought. Pure, clear ice. My carefully rehearsed, utterly idiotic opening line, something about the wine selection, which I knew nothing about, died on my lips. Because as she turned fully on the stool to face me, the dim, artful lighting of the bar caught the planes of her face, and a jolt went through me, so sharp and absolute it felt like an electric shock. My blood ran cold, my stomach plummeted, taking a scenic tour of my ankles. I knew her. Not personally, not in the way you know a friend or a colleague. I knew her from photographs. Photos on a mantelpiece, in silver frames, in a warm, lived-in house across town. Photos of her standing next to a younger, happier version of herself, and a lanky, grinning teenager who I knew better than almost anyone in the world. This woman, this terrifyingly elegant, powerful, intimidating woman, was Eleanor Vance, my best friend Noah's mom. The world tilted on its axis. My brain sputtered, stalled, and then flooded with pure, undiluted panic. Of all the bars, in all the cities, in all the world, I had to walk into this one. Of all the women my idiot friends could have picked for their prank, they had to pick her. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it was a sadist. She was looking at me, a flicker of something, not recognition, but a question in her glacial blue eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as crisp and cool as her perfume. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My entire being was screaming one word: abort, abort, abort. Turn around, walk away, leave the state, change my name. But my feet were bolted to the floor. My friends were watching, their stupid, grinning faces visible over her shoulder. I was trapped. I stammered, my voice a pathetic croak. And then, a tiny shift happened in her expression. The cool assessment softened into faint, polite confusion. Her head tilted slightly. "You're Liam, aren't you?" she said, the name sounding foreign and strange in her precise diction. "Noah's friend, the carpenter." The words hit me like a physical blow. She knew me. Or knew of me. Of course she did. Noah talked about me. We'd been best friends since we were 15, partners in crime through high school and beyond. But in all those years, I had somehow managed to never actually meet his mother. She was always traveling for work, a spectral, high-powered presence in his life. The formidable Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Tech. A legend. And now, I was standing in front of her, about to enact the dumbest pickup attempt in human history. A hot, miserable flush climbed up my neck. "Yeah," I managed to squeak out. "That's me, Liam." "I see," she said, and a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was more like an acknowledgement of a particularly absurd bit of data. She glanced over my shoulder at my friends, who were now trying very hard to pretend they weren't watching, and then her gaze returned to me. The icy blue eyes held a new light. amusement. "And what can I do for you, Liam the carpenter?" The way she said it, separating my name from my profession, wasn't a slight. It was a simple statement of fact. But it underscored the ridiculousness of the situation. I was a tradesman. She was a titan of industry. And I was here on a dare. There was no way out but through. I took a breath, my mind racing. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say, "My moron friends dared me to hit on you." So I did the only thing I could think of. I lied. Badly. "I saw you from over there," I said, gesturing vaguely. "And I thought I should come say hello, since, Noah." It was weak, pathetic, not even close to believable. We both knew it. The ghost of a smile widened into a genuine, if small, curve. "You thought you should come say hello to your best friend's mother at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, in a bar." She laid the facts out like evidence in a trial, and I was guilty on all counts. "When you put it like that, it sounds weird," I mumbled, my face burning. "It is weird, Liam," she said, but the amusement in her voice was undeniable now. It softened the edges of her intimidating presence. For the first time, I saw a person, not a legend, a person who looked tired. There were faint lines around her eyes that the photos on Noah's mantelpiece didn't show. Her shoulders, for all their perfect posture, seemed to be holding up an invisible weight. "They dared you, didn't they?" she asked, her voice dropping a little. She nodded her head discreetly toward my friends. The directness of the question disarmed me completely. The lie evaporated. All I could do was nod, my ears hot with shame. "Yeah." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I prepared for the dismissal, the cold shoulder, the quiet call for security. Instead, she did something completely unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a soft, breathy sound, full of genuine mirth. "Well," she said, picking up her wine glass for the first time, "that's the most honest thing a man has said to me in a bar in years." She took a sip, her eyes sparkling over the rim of the glass. "Tell me, Liam, what was the plan if I hadn't been your best friend's mother?" The question was so absurd, so far beyond the realm of anything I had prepared for, that the truth just fell out. "I don't know," I confessed. "I didn't think I'd get this far." Her smile lingered. "I see." She set her glass down. An odd silence fell between us. My friends were probably having an aneurysm. I should have made my excuses and fled. But I was rooted to the spot, caught in the orbit of her strange, unexpected grace. "It's been a long day," she said, more to herself than to me. Her gaze drifted away for a second, and the tiredness I'd glimpsed before washed over her features. The CEO mask slipped, and for a brief moment, she just looked like a woman who wanted to be anywhere else. A long week, actually. My own anxieties, the letter about my workshop, the constant, grinding worry about money, resonated with the weariness in her voice. I knew that feeling, the bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "I get that," I said, the words quiet. She looked back at me, her focus sharpening. She seemed surprised by my response, as if she'd expected a platitude or an awkward attempt to pry. I offered neither. I just stood there, two people admitting, in our own way, that we were struggling. "Well, Liam," she said, her tone shifting back to something more formal, but not unkind. "Thank you for the diversion. You can tell your friends you succeeded." She gave a small, dismissive wave. "Go on, I'm sure they're dying to know how you crashed and burned." It was a clear dismissal, a polite but firm "get lost." But as I started to turn, A wave of something, protectiveness maybe, or just simple human decency, washed over me. Leaving her here, alone, looking so tired, felt wrong. My idiot friends and their prank had led me here, but this moment felt separate from that. It felt real. "Are you okay?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The question hung in the air between us. Her mask snapped back into place, her expression instantly guarded. "I'm fine." The words were clipped, automatic, a reflex. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the lie. I knew it because I used it all the time myself. "Okay," I said, not pushing. I gave a small nod. "Well, it was interesting meeting you, Mr. Vance." A small furrow appeared between her brows. For a second, I thought I'd offended her. Then her lips twitched again. "It's Eleanor," she corrected softly. "And I'm divorced. Just Eleanor." "Eleanor," I repeated. I finally found the strength to retreat, giving her a small, awkward nod before turning and walking back toward my table. The journey felt even longer this time. My friends descended on me like vultures, a barrage of questions and hoots of laughter. "What did she say? Did she shut you down hard? Dude, your face was so red." I didn't answer. I just sat down, my mind a million miles away, replaying the strange, surreal encounter. I could still smell her perfume, still see the profound weariness in her eyes. The prank had backfired, but not in the way I expected. It hadn't made me feel small or humiliated. It had made me feel seen. And it had shown me something I never expected to see. The powerful, untouchable Eleanor Vance was just as human as the rest of us. As my friends continued to cackle, I glanced back at the bar. She was gone. The stool was empty, her wine glass left half full. It was as if she'd never been there at all. But the quiet hum of the encounter remained, a low-frequency vibration that I knew would follow me home. Later that night, as I lay in my bed, the sounds of the city muted outside, the scent of wood drifting up from the floorboards. I couldn't stop thinking about her. The dare felt like a distant, juvenile memory. What remained was the image of her tired eyes and the quiet dignity with which she'd handled my mortifying approach. The gulf between our worlds seemed just as vast as ever, but for a few strange minutes, we had stood on opposite banks and acknowledged one another. And for some reason, that felt more significant than any stupid prank. A week passed. The memory of the bar faded into the background, overshadowed by the more pressing reality of my workshop. I spend my days in a frantic haze of work, trying to finish a set of custom kitchen cabinets, the payment for which would barely make a dent in the new rent. The number from the letter was a constant, mocking presence in the back of my mind. Every cut of the saw, every turn of the lathe felt like a race against time. I was sanding down a large slab of maple, the fine dust coating my arms and filling the air with a sweet, woody scent, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It was probably Josh, wanting to rehash the Eleanor incident for the 10th time. But it buzzed again, and then a third time. Annoyed, I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled it out. It was an unknown number. A text message. "Liam, this is Eleanor Vance. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Noah's contact list. I have a business proposition for you. Are you free to talk?" I read the message once, then a second time. My heart did a strange, stuttering skip. A business proposition? What kind of business could Eleanor Vance possibly have with me? My mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. Was she going to tell Noah about the dare? Was this some kind of elaborate corporate-level revenge? My hands were trembling slightly as I typed back a reply. This is Liam. I can talk now. My phone rang almost instantly. I took a deep breath and answered, the scent of sawdust suddenly feeling thick and cloying in my throat. Hello? Liam, it's Eleanor. Her voice was just as I remembered, crisp, professional, and with an undercurrent of authority that made me feel like I should be standing up straighter. Thank you for taking my call. I'll be brief. I'm in the process of redecorating my office. It's sterile. I need something to warm it up. Noah has told me for years about the quality of your work. I'd like to commission a bookshelf. A bookshelf? Of all the things I had expected, this was not one of them. It was so normal, so practical. A bookshelf, I repeated, my voice flat with surprise. Yes, something substantial. Walnut, perhaps. I can send you the dimensions of the wall. We can discuss design and, of course, your fee. My fee. The words hung in the air. This was a job. A real, paying job from a client who could undoubtedly afford to pay well. It felt like a lifeline thrown from a completely unexpected direction. But it also felt complicated. Working for my best friend's mom, the woman I'd been dared to hit on, the awkwardness was suffocating. Of course, I stammered, my business brain kicking in despite the social paralysis. I can do that. Walnut is a great choice. I'd need to see the space, get a feel for the room, the light. Of course, she said. I'm busy for the next few days, but my assistant can let you into my office on Saturday. Would that work? Saturday is good. Excellent. I'll have her contact you with the details. Thank you, Liam. And with that, she hung up. I stood in the middle of my workshop, my phone still pressed to my ear, the silence humming around me. A bookshelf for Eleanor Vance. A part of me, the practical, desperate part, was elated. This was a high-profile commission, the kind of thing that could lead to other work, the kind of money that could buy me another month, another chance to figure out how to save my business. But another part of me felt a deep, unsettling trepidation. This wasn't just a client. This was Eleanor. And going into her world, her sterile office, felt like crossing a boundary I was meant to stay behind. On Saturday, I found myself standing in front of a gleaming skyscraper of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. Vance Tech Tower. I'd seen it from a distance 100 times, a fixture of the city skyline. Being at its base felt different. It was designed to make you feel small, and it was doing a magnificent job. Her assistant, a young, terrifyingly efficient woman named Chloe, met me in the lobby. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my clean but worn work boots, and I felt the familiar sting of being out of place. She led me to a private elevator that shot us up to the top floor with silent, gut-wrenching speed. Eleanor's office was less an office and more a small principality. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window with a panoramic view of the city that was so breathtaking it felt fake. The other walls were white. The furniture was all sharp angles and chrome. It was exactly as she'd described it. Sterile. It was a room designed for power, not for comfort. There was no life in it, no warmth, no her. Chloe pointed to a long, empty wall. This is the space. Mr. Vance will need the final piece to be installed outside of business hours. She will be in touch to discuss the design. I nodded, pulling out my tape measure and a notepad. I tried to focus on the task, on the dimensions, on the play of light from the massive window. But my mind kept drifting. I imagined Eleanor sitting behind that huge, empty desk, staring out at the city she seemed to own. And I thought of the profound loneliness that must come with a view like that. The room felt like a cage, albeit a gilded one. I took my measurements, made my sketches, and left as quickly as I could, the sterile, conditioned air of the tower feeling thin and unsatisfying in my lungs. Back in my workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of wood and the honest clutter of my tools, I could finally breathe again. I drew up a few designs that evening, but my mind wasn't on the lines or the joinery. It was on the room. On her. I thought about the contrast between that cold, empty office and the warmth in Noah's descriptions of her. The fierce maternal love he spoke of. I thought about the weariness I'd seen in her eyes at the bar. She wasn't the woman who belonged in that office. Not really. On a whim, I sketched a new design. It was still substantial, still walnut, but I added details that felt more personal. A small, hand-carved panel of intertwined vines hidden on the side, a slightly curved, more organic top, a built-in reading light in a small nook. It was a design that wasn't just for a CEO. It was for a person. It was a piece of furniture that invited you to touch it, to use it, to fill it with books that were loved and read, not just displayed. I emailed it to her late that night, along with the more conventional designs, adding a short note. Design C is a bit different. It's what I thought the room needed. I braced myself for a polite rejection. It was unprofessional, presumptuous. Her reply came within 10 minutes. I love it. Let's go with C. Send me your invoice for the deposit. Just that. No questions, no hesitation. A jolt of something, pride, connection, something I couldn't name, went through me. She had seen what I was trying to do. She had understood. The work became my focus, my obsession. I sourced the perfect slabs of black walnut, the grain dark and rich like cooled lava. Every day I lost myself in the process. The rhythmic scrape of the hand plane, the precise cut of the dovetail joints, the slow transformation of raw material into something beautiful and functional. It was more than a job. It felt like I was building a bridge. I didn't know where it led, but I was building it with everything I had. Eleanor would text me occasionally, short, professional messages. How is it progressing? When do you estimate completion? But sometimes a different kind of message would slip through. One evening, a text arrived late. Just finished a 14-hour board meeting. I think I've forgotten how to speak in sentences that don't contain the word synergy. I was cleaning up the shop, tired and covered in sawdust. I smiled. I typed back, try this sentence. I am going to drink some tea and not think about synergy. A moment later, her reply came. An excellent suggestion. Peppermint or chamomile? Peppermint for defiance, I texted back. Chamomile for surrender. Peppermint it is. Our conversations started to unfold in these little snippets, these brief dispatches from our separate worlds. I'd send her a photo of a particularly beautiful wood grain. She'd tell me about a ridiculous corporate buzzword she'd had to endure all day. We talked about books, about the city, about the weirdness of being an adult. We never talked about the bar. We never talked about Noah. It was a fragile, unstated agreement. This space we were creating was just for us. One afternoon, she showed up at the workshop unannounced. I was wrestling with a large, heavy shelf, trying to clamp it into place, and I didn't hear the door open over the sound of the radio. It's even more beautiful in person. Her voice startled me. I turned, my heart hammering. She was standing just inside the doorway, dressed in a sharp gray pantsuit, looking completely out of place and yet, somehow, perfectly at home. She was looking at the partially assembled bookshelf, a genuine, unguarded admiration on her face. Eleanor, I said, my voice hoarse. I wasn't expecting you. I had a meeting canceled nearby. I was curious, she said, her eyes scanning the organized chaos of my workshop. She ran a hand over a stack of planed cherry wood, her touch surprisingly gentle. This is where the magic happens. It's mostly just a lot of noise and dust, I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious of the clutter, of the fine layer of sawdust that coated everything. No, she said, her gaze meeting mine. It's real. It's a place where things are made. My world is all about abstracts, projections, hypotheticals. This is solid. She walked closer to the bookshelf, her fingers tracing the curve of the top piece I had spent days shaping. You were right. This is what the room needed. She looked so out of her element in her expensive suit, and yet I had never seen her look more relaxed. The guarded tension she usually carried was gone. Here, in my world, she wasn't the CEO. She was just Eleanor. Can I get you some coffee? I asked, gesturing toward the small battered percolator in the corner. It's not from a fancy machine with a name I can't pronounce, but it's strong. A real smile lit up her face, reaching her eyes. I would love some. I rinsed out 2 mugs, my hands not quite steady. We sat on 2 overturned crates, sipping hot black coffee, the half-finished bookshelf standing between us like a silent chaperone. She asked me about my work, about how I got started. I told her about my grandfather, who had been a cabinet maker, and how he'd taught me to read the story in a piece of wood. In return, she told me about her first job, programming in a dusty university basement, long before Tech was even a dream. She spoke of her passion for logic, for building elegant systems out of code. I realized we weren't so different. We were both builders. We just used different materials. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. Liam, she said, her tone serious. Thank you. For the coffee. And for this. She gestured to the bookshelf, but I knew she meant more than that. Anytime, I said quietly. After she left, the workshop felt too quiet. Her perfume lingered in the air, a strange, clean counterpoint to the scent of wood and oil. The line between client and something else was blurring into oblivion. And the thought of it didn't scare me anymore. It felt like coming home. A few weeks later, with the bookshelf nearing completion, Eleanor asked me to meet her for lunch. To finalize the installation details, her text read, but the formality felt thin, like a veil. We met at a small, quiet Italian place, far from the corporate lunch spots downtown. It felt like a deliberate choice, a neutral ground between our 2 worlds. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the corner. She wore a soft, cream-colored sweater instead of a suit jacket. The simple change made her look younger, more approachable. The ice had melted, replaced by something warmer and far more dangerous. I was beginning to think you lived in that workshop, she said, a teasing light in her eyes as I sat down. I was beginning to think you lived in that office tower, I countered, and her smile was my reward. Lunch was easy, comfortable. We talked like old friends. The conversation flowed from books to bad movies to the challenges of keeping a houseplant alive. I found myself telling her about the rent increase, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I hadn't told anyone else, not even Noah. Admitting it felt like admitting failure. But Eleanor didn't offer pity or, worse, charity. She just listened, her expression serious and focused. That's predatory, she said, her voice sharp with a flash of the CEO I knew. Have you spoken to a lawyer? There are tenant protection laws, even for commercial properties. I can't afford a lawyer, I said, the admission tasting bitter. I know a few, she said simply. Pro bono. Let me make a call. No strings attached, just a conversation so you know your options. I hesitated. It felt like a handout, a step over a line I was trying so hard to maintain. I was her contractor, not her project. The feeling of inadequacy, the core vulnerability I always carried, flared up. She was powerful, capable, a problem solver. I was the guy who couldn't even pay his rent. She must have seen the conflict on my face. "Liam," she said, her voice softening. "People have helped me in my life. Let someone help you. It's not a transaction, it's just being a friend." Friend. The word hung in the air between us, charged and new. I looked at her, at the genuine concern in her pale blue eyes, and the wall I had built around myself crumbled a little more. I gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Okay. Thank you." It was as we were leaving, stepping out of the warm restaurant into the cool afternoon air, that our fragile bubble burst. "Eleanor, darling, I thought I recognized that laugh." The voice was smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. A man stepped out from a black town car idling at the curb. He was handsome in a severe, joyless way, dressed in a suit that was so perfectly tailored it looked like a uniform. He moved toward Eleanor, his eyes flicking over me with an expression of profound disinterest, as if I were a piece of street furniture. Eleanor's posture stiffened instantly. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a rigid, controlled mask. "Marcus," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I was having lunch across the street. Imagine my surprise," he said, his smile never reaching his cold, dark eyes. This had to be him, the ex-husband, Marcus Thorne. His gaze fell on me again, this time with a dawning, mocking amusement. "And who is this? Don't tell me, your new driver?" The insult was so casual, so effortless, it took my breath away. Heat climbed up my neck. My hands curled into fists in my pockets. Every instinct I had screamed at me to step forward, to say something, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I looked at Eleanor. I saw the flash of humiliation in her eyes, the tension in her jaw. Escalating this would only make it worse for her. This wasn't about me. It was about protecting her. I forced my hands to relax. I met Marcus's gaze, my expression deliberately neutral. "I'm Liam," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "A friend." Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A friend? Eleanor, darling, you're collecting strays now? I thought you had better taste." He looked me up and down again, taking in my simple jacket and worn jeans. "Let me guess. He does things with his hands?" The sneer in his voice was a physical thing. Eleanor took a sharp breath, about to speak, but I was faster. I didn't rise to the bait. I didn't defend myself. I just turned my full attention to her, blocking Marcus out completely. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice low, for her alone. The question seemed to break the spell. Her focus shifted from Marcus to me. The rigid control in her face softened with surprise, and then with something else. Gratitude. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Marcus, leave," she said, her voice regaining its familiar authority. It was the voice of a CEO, cold and absolute. "You are not welcome here. We are not having this conversation." "Oh, we'll have this conversation," he hissed, his charming facade dropping to reveal something ugly underneath. "When you've come to your senses and dropped your charity project." He shot me one last look of pure contempt before turning on his heel and sliding back into the waiting car. The vehicle pulled away with a smooth, silent surge of power, leaving a wake of toxic silence behind it. We stood on the sidewalk, the sounds of the city rushing back in to fill the void. Eleanor was staring at the spot where the car had been, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding her body together. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of her power, left raw and exposed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I am so sorry you had to witness that." "Don't apologize," I said, my voice rough with a protective anger I hadn't known I possessed. "He's the one who should be sorry." She shook her head, not looking at me. "That's him. That's what he does. He finds your weakest point and presses until you break." I wanted to reach out, to put a hand on her arm, to offer some kind of physical comfort. But I didn't. The space between us suddenly felt charged with the history of her pain, a territory I had no right to enter. So I just stood there, a silent, solid presence beside her. "You handled that well," she said after a long moment, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were shadowed, but the admiration in them was clear. "Most men would have gotten angry, tried to fight him." "I wanted to," I admitted honestly. "But it wouldn't have helped you." Her gaze held mine, and in that moment, something profound shifted between us. It was no longer about a dare, or a bookshelf, or a friendship. The roles we had been assigned, CEO, carpenter, best friend's mom, they all fell away. We were just a man and a woman, standing on a city street, having survived a skirmish in a war I was only just beginning to understand. "No," she said softly. "It wouldn't have." She took a shaky breath, pulling her composure around her like a familiar coat. "I should go. I have a call." I nodded, knowing it was an excuse. "Okay. Call me if you need anything." "I will," she said, but we both knew she wouldn't. She walked away, her back straight once more, the CEO mask firmly back in place. But I had seen the cracks, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the encounter with Marcus wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The real beginning. The call came late that night. I was in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, the scene with Marcus replaying in my head on a loop. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that it was her. "Liam?" Her voice was small, fragile. All the boardroom authority was gone. "I'm here," I said, sitting up. "Are you home?" "Yes." A long pause. I could hear her take a shaky breath. "This is stupid. I shouldn't have called." "It's not stupid," I said firmly. "What's wrong?" Marcus, he just emailed my entire board. A poison pen letter disguised as friendly concern, talking about my erratic behavior and questionable new associations. It's vague enough to be deniable, but everyone knows what he means." Her voice broke on the last few words. "He's trying to paint me as unstable. He's trying to take my company away from me. Again." The calculated cruelty of it made my stomach clench. "Where are you?" I asked again, my voice low and steady. "In my apartment. It's big and empty." I knew that feeling, the way 4 walls could feel like a universe of loneliness. "Can I come over?" I asked, the words out before I could second-guess them. The silence on the other end of the line was so long I thought she'd hung up. "No," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Could I come to you? To the workshop?" The request hit me with the force of a physical blow. She didn't want the comfort of her own sterile penthouse. She wanted my world, the dust and the noise and the reality of it. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick. "Of course. I'll leave the door unlocked." I threw on my clothes and went downstairs. The workshop was dark and quiet, the hulking shape of the nearly finished bookshelf a silent witness in the center of the room. I turned on a single, low-wattage lamp in the corner, casting a warm, gentle glow over the space. I put the kettle on for peppermint tea. I didn't tidy up. She had asked to come here, to this place, and I wanted her to have it, exactly as it was. Real. 20 minutes later, the door creaked open. She stood there, silhouetted against the streetlights. She had changed out of her work clothes and was wearing a simple gray sweater and dark pants. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She looked utterly lost. She stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind her, sealing us in together. She didn't say anything. Her gaze swept over the workshop, over the tools hanging neatly on the walls, the stacks of wood, the familiar, comforting clutter of my life. Her shoulders, which had been tense and high, lowered by a fraction. "It smells like stability," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I brought her a mug of tea, our fingers brushing as she took it. The jolt of contact was electric, a sudden spark in the quiet, heavy air. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic as if it were a lifeline. "He's right, you know," she said, her voice hollow as she stared into the steam. "Marcus, he's right." "No, he's not," I said immediately. "Yes, he is," she insisted, her gaze lifting to meet mine. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "What am I doing, Liam? Dragging you into this? A carpenter, a good, decent man. I'm going to ruin you. He'll come after you next. He'll try to destroy your business, your reputation. He's done it before. I'm a wrecking ball, and you're standing right in my path." This was her deepest fear. Not that she would lose her company, but that she would be a source of destruction, that she was a burden. I set my own mug down and took a step closer. "Eleanor, look at me." She did, her chin trembling. "I'm a grown man," I said, my voice low but fierce. "I make my own choices. Marcus Thorne doesn't scare me. Losing my workshop scares me. Not being able to pay my bills scares me. But him? He's just a bully with a big bank account. The only thing that scares me about this situation is losing you." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and terrifying, and true. It was my own deepest fear, spoken aloud for the first time. My fear that I wasn't enough, that this fragile, beautiful thing we were building was temporary, that once the bookshelf was delivered, once her crisis passed, she would retreat back to her world, and I would be left in mine, the silence in the workshop more profound than ever before. "You're afraid of losing me?" she whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "Liam, I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. You build things with your hands. I live in a glass tower, and you live above your shop. I'm your best friend's mother. How could you possibly want this? Want me?" There it was. Her fear mirroring my own. The chasm between our worlds. The thing that had been an unspoken obstacle from the very beginning. I closed the remaining distance between us, my hands coming up to gently cup her face. I wiped away her tear with my thumb, my rough skin a contrast to her soft cheek. "I don't want the CEO," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't care about the glass tower, and I'm not afraid of your ex-husband. I want the woman who drinks peppermint tea for defiance. I want the woman who gets a secret thrill from elegant code. I want the woman who saw a lonely man in a bar and showed him kindness instead of contempt. I want Eleanor. You. That's all I want." A sob escaped her lips, a sound of profound relief, of a dam breaking. "But I'm a mess," she whispered. "I'm falling apart." "Then let me be the one to help you pick up the pieces," I said softly. "You are not a burden. You're the best thing that has ever happened to me. You walked into my life on a stupid dare, and you made it better. You made me better." Her hands came up to rest on my chest, her fingers curling into my shirt. She looked up at me, her pale blue eyes full of a dawning, fragile hope. The space between us was no longer a chasm, it was a single, shared breath. And then I lowered my head and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of confession, of homecoming. It was the culmination of every stolen glance, every late-night text, every quiet conversation. Her lips were soft, yielding, and she kissed me back with a desperate, pent-up longing that matched my own. It was a kiss that tasted of peppermint tea and sawdust and saltwater tears. It was the most real thing I had ever felt in my entire life. We stood there for a long time in the warm, quiet glow of the workshop, the half-finished bookshelf bearing silent witness to the moment the arrangement became real, the moment the dare became a devotion. The world outside, with its predatory ex-husbands and impossible rent increases, faded away. In that moment, there was only us and the solid, irrefutable truth of what we had found in each other. The days that followed were a strange mix of clandestine romance and strategic planning. Eleanor, armed with a newfound resolve, was a force of nature. The pro bono lawyer she'd connected me with found several loopholes in my new lease agreement, giving me leverage I never knew I had. At the same time, Eleanor, with my quiet support, began to methodically dismantle Marcus's attack on her company. She was brilliant, a master strategist, but this time she wasn't fighting alone. Every night she would call me, and we would talk through the day's battles. I didn't understand the corporate jargon, but I understood the emotional toll. I was her anchor, the quiet voice that reminded her to breathe, to rest, to be Eleanor, and not just the CEO. We finished the bookshelf together. On the final evening, she came to the shop dressed in jeans, and I showed her how to apply the final coat of oil, her hand on top of mine as we worked the fragrant liquid into the rich, dark walnut. It felt symbolic, putting the finishing touches on the project that had brought us together. The installation happened on a Sunday. The huge, sterile office was quiet and empty. It took two of us to get the piece into place, and when it was finally set against the wall, it transformed the room. It was a warm, living presence in the cold glass box. It was full of her books now, a mix of business texts, classic literature, and worn paperback sci-fi novels she confessed she loved. It was a reflection of her, the real her. As we stood back to admire our work, she slipped her hand into mine. "It's perfect," she whispered. "We did a good job," I said, squeezing her hand. But one final obstacle remained, the one we had been avoiding. Noah. We decided to tell him together. We invited him over to my apartment for dinner, a casual setting for a conversation that was anything but. He arrived, grinning, a six-pack of beer in his hand, completely oblivious. "Smells good, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "What's the occasion?" My heart was pounding. I glanced at Eleanor, who was sitting on my small sofa, looking nervous but resolute. She gave me a small, encouraging nod. We made it through dinner with small talk, the unspoken truth a heavy weight on the table. Finally, as Noah was talking about a new project at his architecture firm, I took a deep breath and plunged in. "Noah," I started, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "There's something we need to tell you." He stopped, his smile fading as he looked from my serious face to his mother's. Okay, you're scaring me. What's going on? Eleanor took over. Noah, honey, she began, her voice gentle. Liam and I, we've been spending some time together. Noah's expression was one of pure confusion. Yeah, I know, the bookshelf. Mom, it looks amazing, by the way. Liam's a genius. It's more than the bookshelf, I said quietly. We're together, as a couple. The silence that followed was absolute. Noah stared at me, then at his mother, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to make the pieces fit. Confusion gave way to disbelief, and then to a flicker of something else. Shock. Maybe even betrayal. You're what? He finally asked, his voice flat. You're kidding, right? This is a joke. It's not a joke, honey, Eleanor said softly. But how? He stammered. You're my mom, and you're my best friend. How does that even happen? So I told him. I told him everything. The stupid dare at the bar, the awkward conversation, the unexpected connection. I left out the parts about Marcus, about the intense pressure she was under. That was her story to tell. I just told him my part, how I had fallen for his mother. He listened, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. I don't get it, he said finally, shaking his head. I don't get it. He looked at Eleanor. Mom, he's my age. He's a carpenter. After Dad... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. After the world of wealth and power she had shared with Marcus, how could she be with someone like me? The old insecurity flared in my chest, hot and sharp. He wasn't being malicious. He was just being honest. But Eleanor's response was swift and sure. After your father, Liam is exactly what I need, she said, her voice full of a fierce love that was directed as much at me as it was at her son. Your father valued power and status and money. Liam values honesty and kindness and integrity. He sees me, Noah. Not the CEO, not your mother. Me. And I see him. It's the truest thing in my life right now. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine on the table. It was a simple, public declaration, a united front. Noah looked at our joined hands, and I saw his expression soften. He saw the way she looked at me, the way I looked at her. He saw the reality of it, not just the strange, unbelievable premise. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and scrubbed a hand over his face. This is weird, he said. This is officially the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. He looked at us, a faint, bewildered smile playing on his lips. But, are you happy? He asked her. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. Very. He looked at me. You too? More than I've ever been, I said honestly. Noah nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. I'm going to need some time to process this. A lot of time. And probably therapy, but... Okay. He stood up. I think I'm gonna go. But I'm glad you're happy, Mom. He looked at me. Take care of her, man. I will, I promised. After he left, the apartment was quiet. The final hurdle had been crossed. The last secret was out. Eleanor leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her. It was all real now. No more hiding. A few weeks later, I stood in my workshop, a new lease agreement sitting on my workbench. I'd managed to negotiate a 5-year term at a rent I could actually afford, thanks to the lawyer's help and a new business plan that involved subletting some of my space to other artisans. I had saved my world on my own terms. Eleanor had offered to help, to buy the building outright, but I had refused. I needed to do this myself. She had understood. She was my partner, not my savior. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the space where her bookshelf had once stood. It felt strange to see it empty. A memory, but a good one, the best one. My phone buzzed. A picture from Eleanor. It was a selfie of her, sitting in her office. In the background, the bookshelf stood, filled with life. She was smiling, a genuine, relaxed smile I had come to know so well. The caption read, "Just wanted to say hi to my favorite carpenter. Thinking of you." I smiled, a deep, steady happiness settling in my chest. I thought back to that night in the bar, to the stupid, drunken dare that had felt like the ultimate humiliation. My friends had meant it as a joke, a way to highlight the chasm between my life and the lives of people like her. They couldn't have known they were actually handing me a map. They thought they were daring me to date her. What they were really doing was daring me to find a purpose, to find a home, to find the missing piece of my own life that I never even knew was gone. It was a crazy, impossible beginning, the kind of thing that only happens in movies. But it had led to this, to a quiet, solid reality that felt more real than the wood under my hands. This was our new chapter, the start of something real, built not on a dare, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a love that had taken us both by surprise. And I knew, with a certainty that filled every corner of my being, that it was built to last.